here we're going to be briefly looking at an example of two runners who are lacking hip extension, and it causes their stride to be very bouncy, and actually minimizes their ability to move forward in their running instead of moving up and down. So they get a lot of up and down oscillations. As a sitting society, we tend to get really tight in the front of the hip, and it limits our ability to extend our leg behind us as we go to push off, and that's a huge problem. So as we come forward or come through with our leg, if we don't have good hip flexor length here, what's going to happen is we're either going to get a compensation through our low back and extend through our low back. So we're not going to be stable for push off, because as we fire into the ground here, we're just getting movement up here. That's you can't fire a cannon from the canoe scenario where you need to have a nice strong base up top. But the main thing here is that when you can't extend this hip behind you and you can't get good motion backwards, what happens is the force vector, or the line for push-off, has a huge upward slope. But if you have good hip extension, what happens is a lot of that push-off force can be more driven forward. But we need to have the hip flexor extensibility to do that, and I'll show an example of someone who does in a minute. If we look at the other runner on the other side, same thing. She's kind of got a double whammy going on where she lands on the front of her foot, which treats that foot like a diving board. So as that foot comes through, she doesn't get good hip extension. She can't get that foot to come behind her, and the slope of the line is extremely up instead of directed more forward. So a good hip extension, good hip flexor extensibility will allow that leg to come back further for push off, and it gets a better force vector that's directed more horizontally than upwards. You can actually see with this runner the tightness and causing low back motion. You can see how her pelvis is nice and flat here, but watch how this whole thing tips forward as she runs. You can look at the short line as her pelvis rocks upwards to get some kind of hip extension. So working on hip extension is really important for most runners. You can get faster because you're going to improve your force vector moving forward. So it's one of those ways that you can run faster without having to run more or to train more to do so. So here's the opposite side of the spectrum. We're actually going to be watching the runner on the left, and then we have the professional men from Chicago Marathon this year, and we'll look at how their hip extension changes their ability to run. So as be able to run faster, and a huge problem for most of us is that we sit all day. There's a lot of desk jockeys out there, and then they expect to get up and just run. So if we look at the runner on the left, we just look at, there's form flaws in this runner, but we're not too concerned about that right now. We want to look at hip extension only. For us to generate force, this leg that is forward needs to pull through and extend behind, and that excursion is what's going to give us the ability to generate force. But if we catch here and we pull through, but we can't go through our full excursion, we're not going to get full force production, and especially because the hip extension is really huge for the posterior chain, the glutes and the hamstrings, we're cutting out a lot of big muscle groups that can generate a ton of force for us. So if we can get better hip extension, we can run faster because we change that slope of the line, but we get through more excursion at our hip. We can use our hip more instead of our calf and our quad. So we watch him come through. We'll watch the right leg. He's going to hit. He's going to pull through, and then he breaks neutral, and you can see how that hip gets extended behind him. So this is what we're looking for. We need to have good hip extension, and really what it allows to do, if we can get good hip mobility, good pelvis mobility, we can open up on the other side and we get this wide hip angle. That wide hip angle allows us to break out of shuffling, allows us to get better force distribution. And look at the way his leg is situated right now on the right side. If we look at the line of force that's going to produce, it's going to be a lot of forward movement versus the other runners who, as he pushes off with his calf, that green arrow has a nice slope to it, but the runners that we previously saw, their slope was much steeper, and they were getting a lot more up force associated with that. So it's huge for us to be able to extend that hip behind us, give ourselves the best ability to generate a lot of force moving forward, but also to allow our bones to go through greater excursion to produce more force. Look, for example, look at the runners on the right. We're going to watch the Chicago Marathoners come through, and we're just going to pick a bunch of them out as they come through. But you're going to see a ton of hip extension with these guys. So we'll come through here. We'll start looking, get rid of those blue lines. Right at that first guy up front, you can see how much hip extension he has on his left leg, how much openness there is to his stride. And you're going to see this across the board for all these runners. Look at the hip extension here and the hip flexion there. All these strides are really open. You don't have to be a professional to do this. You just need to have the motion for it. And that's a huge piece of this. We look at the next guy over as he comes through. Another big chunk of hip extension, hip openness, and it's just going to be like that across the board. You're going to see all these guys having great hip extension, and that allows them to drive forward in the running and not so much up. So you can kind of watch them all come through and look at all that great hip extension here, and it's really across the board. So working and identifying if you have this mobility, if you have the ability to get in this position, is part of the battle, because if you try to put yourself in this position, chances are you're just going to compensate through your low back, or you compensate by turning your foot. So find a skilled clinician who can assess this for you, because it's a great way to get faster without having to run more and put more wear and tear on your body. Are you looking to become a stronger, faster, and more well-rounded runner? Then jump on over to RunSmartOnline.com and take our 10-day free challenge. Try our run-specific, time-saving, and easy-access videos that let you get stronger from anywhere, whether it be at work, home, or on the road.